Okay, so let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into a question that honestly sounds like something straight out of a political thriller, but it's a real debate that's happening. Could Donald Trump legally become president for a third time?
This whole conversation really exploded thanks to a pretty bold prediction. According to The Economist, Steve Bannon, a former White House strategist, has been saying that after a potential second term, Trump is going to be president in 28. Now, this isn't just some random comment. It's actually based on a very, very particular and, let's be honest, very controversial reading of the U.S. Constitution.
So how in the world could this even work? Well, that's what we're here to do. We're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the scenario itself. Then we'll dive into the actual constitutional limit, explore this supposed loophole, see the specific plan that's being floated, and finally, check in with what the legal experts are saying about the whole thing.
So what is this Trump 2028 scenario, really? At its core, it's a pretty radical idea that the path to a third presidential term doesn't actually require changing the law at all. The argument is that it's already there, kind of hidden in plain sight within the Constitution's text.
This is probably the first thing that pops into your head, right? I mean, the whole idea of a two-term limit is just baked into how we think about the presidency. And for good reason. It's written down. So what's the actual barrier here?
The big obstacle, the one thing standing in the way, has a name. It's the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. This is the piece of law that says no to any president seeking a third elected term. But to really get it, you have to know a little bit of the backstory.
You see, the two-term limit wasn't always a hard and fast rule. For a long time, it was just a tradition started by George Washington. But then came Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who got elected 4 times. After his long time in office, Congress decided to make the tradition official. They passed the 22nd Amendment in 1947, and by 1951, it was law.
And now we get to it. This is the single most important line in this entire debate. The amendment says, and I quote, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice." Pay very close attention to that one word, elected. It's the hinge that this whole theory swings on.
So 2 elections. That seems pretty open and shut, right? Case closed. But what if the path back to the presidency didn't involve an election at all? That's the question that cracks open this potential constitutional loophole.
And that brings us to the core of the whole argument, this idea of a loophole. The people pushing this Trump 2028 theory argue that the framers of the 22nd Amendment left a gap, a really specific one. They focused on how a person gets into office, not just how long they can stay there.
This slide really just lays it all out, nice and simple. On the one hand, you have the clear letter of the law. You cannot be elected more than twice, period. But on the other hand, here's the crucial detail. The law says nothing, not a single word, about a limit on how many times a person can serve as president if they get there some other way.
So, okay, let's walk through the logic here. The argument goes like this. Since the amendment only restricts elections and not service, it doesn't technically stop a former president from holding another office, like a senator, a cabinet secretary, or, and this is the important one, vice president. So if a two-term president were to become VP, they could then move up to the presidency through succession, totally bypassing the need to be elected a third time.
So this isn't just some abstract legal theory. No, proponents have actually mapped out a whole step-by-step scenario for how a former 2-term president could find themselves back in the Oval Office.
All right, get this. Here's how the most talked about version of the plan would go down. First, a new Trump-aligned president wins the 2028 election. Then, that new president appoints Donald Trump to be their vice president, which would, by the way, require Senate confirmation. And then, step 3, the new president would just resign. That would automatically make the vice president the new president, having never been elected to that third term.
The Economist also points out there's another path. A former president could just run as the vice presidential candidate on the 2028 ticket from the get-go. If that ticket wins, they become VP, and then the same resignation scenario could play out. The key in either case is becoming president through succession, not through an election.
Okay, so is this a brilliant legal maneuver or just some kind of constitutional fantasy? Well, this is where the experts come in. And as you can probably guess, they do not agree. It's a pretty fierce debate among legal scholars.
So on one side, you have scholars like Seth Barrett Tillman from Michigan State University. He's saying that if you do a really strict by-the-book reading of the Constitution, the argument actually holds up. He even admits that a few years ago, he would have just dismissed it, but now he thinks there's a real possibility a court might actually say, yeah, okay, this works.
But on the other side, a lot of experts are really skeptical. Stephen Gillers, a law professor at NYU, kind of sums it up perfectly when he just says, "I'm not so sure." His thinking, and the thinking of many others, is that a court would see this as a pretty obvious attempt to get around the intention, or the spirit, of the 22nd Amendment, even if it follows the literal words. And that really is the deep divide here. Is it the letter of the law that matters, or the spirit?
The general feeling, as reported by The Economist, is that even if this loophole exists on paper, most legal experts see the arguments as flimsy and, crucially, untested. They believe a move like this would just violate the whole point of the amendment and completely shatter political norms that we've had for decades.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, here's the bottom line. The 22nd Amendment absolutely limits anyone from being elected president more than twice. But there's this creative and, again, highly controversial legal theory that suggests a kind of backdoor through the vice presidency by focusing on serving a term rather than being elected to it. It's a fascinating, untested idea that really pushes the boundaries of what we thought the rules were.
And ultimately, this whole thing leaves us with a really fundamental question. This debate isn't just about one person or one election. It's about how we read our own founding document. Should we be guided strictly by the literal text, even if it leads to an outcome the authors probably never imagined? Or do the unwritten rules, the spirit of the law, hold more weight? It's a huge constitutional puzzle, and the answer could define the future of the presidency itself.